The market on Talon 5 was not a place for the faint of heart. Under the flickering purple lights that cast long shadows across the muddy pathways, traders and merchants shouted over one another, hawking their wares with desperate enthusiasm. The air was thick with the smell of fuel, sweat, and something distinctly alien, a mixture of spices and mechanical oil that seemed to permeate everything on this outpost planet. This wasn't just any market. This was where they sold the defective merchandise, the polite term used for anything or anyone deemed too damaged, too problematic, or simply too unwanted to be sold in the more reputable establishments across the galaxy. In a small, rusted cage, tucked away in the corner of the busiest section, sat a small figure. If you weren't looking carefully, you might miss her entirely, as she had mastered the art of making herself invisible. Huddled against the back of her enclosure, knees pulled tight against her chest, was Nari. Her skin was a pale blue that might have been beautiful if not for the dullness that years of neglect had imposed upon it. 6 fingers on each hand, common for her species, clutched at the thin fabric wrapped around her shoulders. The silence collar around her neck glowed a faint orange, inhibiting any sounds she might try to make. A weathered placard hung on the cage, returned multiple times, sold as is, no refunds. Jalen had not come to Talon 5 for a child. He was a human trader, specializing in ship parts and mechanical oddities, traveling from system to system in his modest but reliable spacecraft, the Horizon, tall and lean with dark skin weathered by years in space. His face carried the lines of someone who had seen both wonder and hardship across the stars. A long scar ran from his right temple down to his jawline, a souvenir from a deal gone wrong years ago. Today, he needed a new gravitational stabilizer and some circuit boards that were increasingly difficult to find in more regulated markets. Talon 5 was known for having everything, if you knew where to look and weren't too concerned about its origins. "Fresh imports! New shipment!" shouted a Braxian merchant, his 4 arms gesturing wildly at a pile of what looked like perfectly good navigation panels. Jalen paused, inspecting one with practiced eyes. "How fresh?" he asked skeptically, noting the slight corrosion around the edges. "Straight from a Terran cruiser. Only minimal salvage work," the merchant insisted, his spotted skin flushing a deeper orange in his excitement. Jalen was about to haggle when a commotion at the far end of the alley caught his attention. A crowd had gathered around what appeared to be an auction block of sorts. Curiosity got the better of him. "I'll be back," he told the merchant, who hissed in disappointment. The crowd was sparse but vocal, mostly composed of traders looking for cheap labor or exotic specimens. At the center stood a massive Krull, the market owner, towering over everyone at nearly 8 feet tall. His gravelly voice carried over the din. "Last chance. This one's been returned 4 times now. Previous owners claim unresponsiveness, reluctance to follow commands, and general uselessness," he announced, gesturing dismissively toward the small cage where Nari sat. "If no one takes her today, she's going straight to the salvage ships. They always need small hands for the tight spaces." Jalen knew what that meant. The salvage ships were notoriously dangerous. Few who went aboard as workers ever returned. For children, especially alien children without documentation or protection, it was essentially a death sentence. He found himself moving forward before he'd fully processed his intentions. "How much?" he called out, surprising himself almost as much as the Krull, whose yellow eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You want this one? Didn't you hear me? 4 returns. She's defective," the Krull replied. Jalen's gaze shifted to the cage. For the briefest moment, the child inside looked up, and their eyes met. There was no hope there, no pleading, just a vacant acceptance that chilled Jalen to his core. "I heard you. I'm still asking the price," Jalen insisted, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. What was he doing? He had no plans for a child, no space in his life for one. Yet something about the resignation in those eyes had reached into him and grabbed hold. The Krull shrugged his massive shoulders. 100 credits, just to clear the space. It was suspiciously cheap, even for a defective child. Nari must truly have been considered worthless. I'll take her, Jalen said, transferring the credits from his wrist device. The Krull's thin lips curled into what might have been a smile. No returns, he reminded Jalen, tossing him a small activation chip. This deactivates the restraints. She's your problem now. Jalen approached the cage slowly, aware of the small figure shrinking further back as he drew near. He crouched down, maintaining a respectful distance. Hello, he said softly. My name is Jalen. I'm going to open this now, okay? No response came from the girl. Not even a nod. The silence collar probably prevented much movement of her neck anyway. Jalen inserted the chip into the lock, and with a soft click, the door swung open. The collar around her neck dimmed and fell away. Still, she didn't move. I'm not going to hurt you, Jalen assured her, though he knew promises from adults likely meant nothing to her. We can go to my ship. It's small, but it's warm, and there's food. At the mention of food, something flickered in her eyes, the first sign of any emotion he'd seen. Can you walk? He asked. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded almost imperceptibly and slowly unfolded herself from the corner. She was tiny, even smaller than she had appeared when huddled up. Jalen guessed she was the equivalent of about 9 or 10 in human years, though with alien species it was often hard to tell. She stepped out of the cage on unsteady legs, her movements stiff and cautious as though expecting a trap. The crowd had already dispersed, disappointed by the anticlimactic sale. Do you have a name? Jalen asked as they began walking toward the market exit. The girl looked at him, then away quickly. Her gaze fixed on the ground. Her voice, when it finally came, was so faint that Jalen had to lean down to hear it. They called me defect, she whispered. Something in Jalen's chest tightened painfully. That's not a name, he said gently. We'll find your real name, okay? They walked in silence through the market, the girl trailing slightly behind Jalen, her steps quick and light as though ready to flee at any moment. Occasionally, she would stare longingly at food stalls they passed, but she never asked for anything. Jalen's ship was docked in one of the less reputable bays on the outskirts of the trading post. The Horizon wasn't impressive by any standards, a modified TL-450 cargo hauler that had seen better days, patched in multiple places and bearing the scars of minor asteroid impacts. But it was home, and as the entry ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss, Jalen felt the familiar sense of relief that came with returning to his own space. This is it, he said, gesturing for the girl to follow him aboard. It's not much, but it's safe. She hesitated at the bottom of the ramp, her large eyes scanning the exterior of the ship with what looked like technical assessment, rather than fear. It's a TL-450, she said, her voice still quiet but steadier than before. Modified for extended hyperdrive capacity. The stabilizers are outdated, though. Jalen turned in surprise. That's exactly right. How did you know that? She shrugged, looking immediately regretful for having spoken, and returned her gaze to the ground. It's okay, Jalen assured her. I'm impressed. You know ships? Another tiny shrug. I lived on one before she was labeled defective, before she was sold and returned, again and again. The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Well, come aboard. The stabilizers might be outdated, but they work just fine, Jalen said with a smile, trying to keep his tone light. Inside, the Horizon was cluttered but clean. The main cabin served as both living quarters and cargo hold, with crates of parts stacked neatly against one wall. A small galley was tucked into a corner, and several narrow corridors led to other sections of the ship. Are you hungry? Jalen asked, already knowing the answer. The girl's thin frame spoke of long-term undernourishment. She nodded hesitantly. "I'll make some soup. It's not fancy. But it's hot," he said, moving to the galley. "You can sit if you want." He gestured to the small table with 2 chairs. After a moment's hesitation, she perched on the edge of one, her posture rigid and alert. As Jalen prepared a simple broth with the protein and vegetables he had on hand, he watched her from the corner of his eye. She was examining everything in the cabin with careful attention, her gaze lingering on the control panels and engineering schematics pinned to the wall. "Here you go," he said a few minutes later, placing a steaming bowl before her along with a spoon. "Careful, it's hot." She stared at the bowl for a long moment, then at Jalen, confusion evident in her expression. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "It's for you." With trembling hands, she picked up the spoon and took a tiny sip of the broth. Her eyes widened slightly, and she took another spoonful, a bit larger this time. "When did you last eat?" Jalen asked, sitting across from her with his own bowl. She paused, considering. 2 days, she finally answered. "Maybe 3. Jalen felt a surge of anger toward whoever had treated this child so carelessly, but he kept his expression neutral. "Well, there's plenty more if you want it, and we'll have regular meals from now on." She looked up at him sharply, suspicion clear in her gaze. "Why did you buy me?" The directness of the question caught Jalen off guard. He paused, considering his answer carefully. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself. "I didn't like what they were going to do to you, sending you to the salvage ships." "You need someone small for repairs?" she asked, and the matter-of-fact way she said it broke something in Jalen's heart. "No," he said firmly. "I don't need you for anything. I just thought you deserved better than what was happening to you." She studied him for a long moment, clearly trying to detect the lie, the hidden agenda. Finally, she returned to her soup, saying nothing more. After she had eaten 2 full bowls, Jalen showed her to a small side cabin. It was little more than a storage room with a narrow bunk, but it was clean and private. "You can sleep here," he said. "There's a washroom just across the corridor. We'll get you some new clothes tomorrow." She stood in the center of the tiny room, looking lost. "I need to go back to the market to get those parts I came for," Jalen explained. "Will you be okay here for about an hour? The ship is locked, and no one can get in without the code." She nodded, still looking uncertain. "I promise I'll come back," he added, sensing her doubt. "And when I do, maybe we can try to figure out your real name." As Jalen headed back to the market, his mind raced. What had he done? He knew nothing about caring for a child, let alone an alien child who had clearly been traumatized. Yet leaving her to the salvage ships had been unthinkable. He quickly purchased the gravitational stabilizer he needed, along with a few extra supplies, some clothing that looked like it might fit her, basic toiletries, and additional food. As he was paying, his eye caught on a small toolkit designed for precision work, the kind used for delicate circuitry. Remembering how she had assessed his ship, he added it to his purchases. When he returned to the horizon, he half expected to find her gone, either escaped or hidden somewhere in fear. Instead, he found her sitting cross-legged on the floor of the main cabin, carefully examining a broken navigation panel he'd been meaning to fix. She looked up quickly as he entered, hands withdrawing from the panel, as though caught doing something forbidden. "It's okay," Jalen said, setting down his purchases. "Were you looking at how to fix that?" After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "The circuit bridge is disconnected," she said quietly. "And there's corrosion on the main board." Jalen moved closer and crouched down to examine the panel. "You're right. I've been meaning to repair it, but I haven't had time." He unpacked the supplies, laying out the clothing he'd bought for her. "I wasn't sure of the size, but these might work. And..." He held out the small toolkit. "I thought you might like this." Her eyes widened as she stared at the toolkit, but she made no move to take it. "It's yours," Jalen clarified. "A gift." "A gift?" she repeated, as though testing an unfamiliar word. "Yes, something given freely, with no expectation of anything in return." She reached out slowly and took the toolkit, opening it with careful movements. Her fingers hovered over the precision tools, not quite touching them. "Thank you," she whispered, the words sounding unpracticed. "You're welcome," Jalen replied. "Now, before we do anything else, I think we should try to find out your real name. No one should be called Defect." He moved to the ship's computer console and pulled up a search interface. "Do you remember anything about where you came from? Your planet? Your parents? Anything?" She shook her head, clutching the toolkit to her chest. "That's okay," Jalen assured her. "Let's try another approach. When you were sold the first time, was there any documentation, records of some kind?" She considered this. "There was a file. I saw it once on a previous owner's screen." "Good, that's good," Jalen said encouragingly. "Do you remember anything about what it said?" She closed her eyes, concentrating. "It had numbers and letters. NS7291, I think." Jalen entered the code into the ship's database, accessing the interplanetary registration system. Most sentient beings who were illegally trafficked still had some record in the system, even if it was incomplete or corrupted. After a moment, the screen flickered, and a file appeared, heavily redacted but still containing some information. "Nari," Jalen read aloud. "Nari Sarah. Is that familiar at all?" The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Nari," she repeated softly. "Nari Sarah." Something shifted in her expression. A recognition, a connection to something long buried. "I think that's me," she said, her voice stronger than before. "Nari Sarah." Jalen smiled. "Nari Sarah. It's a beautiful name." For the first time since he'd met her, Nari's lips curved into the slightest hint of a smile. The next few weeks aboard the Horizon established a gentle routine. Each morning, Jalen would find Nari already awake, usually tinkering with some piece of equipment or studying the ship's technical manuals. He'd prepare breakfast, and they would eat together, their conversations gradually becoming less one-sided as Nari began to trust that she wouldn't be punished for speaking. During the days, as Jalen navigated through space toward his next trading destinations, he began teaching Nari more about ship repairs and maintenance. She proved to be not just interested, but remarkably skilled. Her small hands perfect for the intricate work that Jalen's larger fingers sometimes struggled with. "How did you learn so much about mechanics?" he asked one day, as they worked together to replace a faulty power coupling. Nari was silent for a moment, focused on aligning the delicate wires. "My first owner," she finally said, her voice carefully neutral. "He needed someone who could reach into small spaces to fix things. He showed me how, so I could be useful." The matter-of-fact way she described her exploitation made Jalen's jaw tighten, but he kept his expression calm. "Well, you're extraordinary at it, but you don't have to do this if you don't want to." Nari looked up at him, confusion evident in her large eyes. "But I like fixing things," she said simply. "When something is broken, and then it works again because of what I did, it feels good." Jalen smiled. "I understand that feeling." As the days passed, more pieces of Nari's past emerged, though never in a linear narrative. Fragments would surface during quiet moments, how she had been separated from her family during a raid on their settlement, her earliest memories of a world with 2 suns and silver forests, the series of owners who had found her too quiet, too stubborn, too difficult to control. "The 4th one sent me back because I wouldn't sing," she told Jalen one evening as they shared a meal. "He said my species was supposed to have beautiful voices, but I wouldn't make any sounds for him." "You don't have to sing for anyone if you don't want to," Jalen assured her. Nari nodded, pushing her food around her plate. I used to sing before, with my mother, but after they took me, I didn't want to anymore. It felt wrong. That makes perfect sense to me, Jalen said gently. One night, about a month after Nari had come aboard the Horizon, Jalen was awakened by sounds of distress. He found Nari in the throes of a nightmare, her small body thrashing against the blankets, incomprehensible words spilling from her lips. Nari, he called softly, keeping his distance. Nari, you're safe. You're on the Horizon with Jalen. Her eyes flew open, wild with fear until recognition slowly dawned. I was back there, she whispered. In the cage. You're not there anymore, Jalen assured her. And you never will be again. She sat up, wrapping her arms around herself. You can't promise that, she said, with a wisdom beyond her years. People make promises all the time, and then they break them. Jalen sat on the edge of her bunk, careful to give her space. You're right. I can't predict the future, but I can promise you this. As long as I'm alive, I will do everything in my power to make sure you are safe, respected, and free. Nari studied his face for a long moment. Why? She finally asked. Why do you care what happens to me? It was a fair question, one that Jalen had asked himself many times over the past weeks. Because every person deserves to be treated with dignity, he answered honestly. Because you are not a thing to be bought and sold. You are Nari Serra, and your life has value, not because of what you can do or how useful you are, but simply because you exist. Tears welled in Nari's eyes, and for a moment, Jalen feared he had somehow upset her. But then, she did something she had never done before. She reached out and took his hand in her small, six-fingered one. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jalen squeezed her hand gently. You're welcome, Nari. The next morning, Jalen presented Nari with a small metal badge he had crafted from spare parts. Etched into its surface was her name, Nari Serra. What is it? She asked, turning it over in her hands. It's an identification badge, like the ones used by licensed mechanics throughout the galaxy. Jalen explained. It's not official, of course, but it has your name on it, so you never forget who you are again. Nari clutched the badge tightly, her eyes shining. Can I wear it? Of course, Jalen said, helping her pin it to her shirt. There, now everyone will know exactly who you are. From that day forward, Nari never took the badge off, polishing it daily until it gleamed. As they traveled from planet to planet, Jalen trading his goods and acquiring new ones, Nari began to emerge from her shell more and more. She no longer flinched when Jalen moved too quickly, and her questions, once so rare, now came freely. Her curiosity, seemingly boundless. On a busy spaceport in the Centauri system, Jalen took Nari shopping for proper clothing and supplies. It was her first time in a crowded public place since the market on Talon 5, and she stayed close to Jalen's side, her hand occasionally reaching up to touch her name badge, as if to remind herself who she was. Can I get this? She asked hesitantly, pointing to a small datapad designed for technical diagrams. Of course, Jalen said without hesitation. Her eyes widened. Just like that? You're not going to ask what I need it for? Jalen shook his head. I trust you, Nari. If you want it, there's a good reason. The concept of being trusted seemed to affect her deeply. Throughout the rest of their shopping trip, she stood a little straighter, her voice a little more confident as she made careful selections. Back on the ship, as they organized their purchases, Nari paused, her expression serious. Jalen, what am I to you? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? Am I your... She struggled to find the right word. Property? Assistant? What am I supposed to be? Jalen set down the supplies he was sorting and gave her his full attention. You're not my property, Nari. No person should be property. You're not my assistant either, although I appreciate your help. You're He paused, realizing the truth as he spoke it. You're someone I care about. Someone I want to see safe and happy. If I had to put a label on it, I'd say you're like family. Nari's eyes widened. Family, she repeated softly. I had a family once, before. You still have family, Jalen said. Your original family is out there somewhere, and I promise we'll try to find them. But in the meantime, if you want, we can be family for each other. Nari's smile, once so rare, bloomed across her face. I would like that, she said. 6 months after rescuing Nari from Talon 5, Jalen received a message that turned their peaceful existence upside down. They were docked at a repair station in the Orion Belt when the notification came through on the ship's communication system. What is it? Nari asked, noting Jalen's troubled expression as he read the message. Jalen hesitated, unsure how to explain. It's a legal notice. Someone named Galvor is claiming ownership of you and demanding your return. The color drained from Nari's face, and her hand went instinctively to the badge on her shirt. Galvor, she whispered, the name clearly familiar and frightening. You know him? Nari nodded, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He was my third owner. He was not kind. Jalen's jaw tightened. Well, he's not getting you back. According to interplanetary law, his claim is invalid. I purchased you legally, regardless of how wrong that system is, and he has no grounds for demanding your return. But as Jalen dug deeper into the legal notice, his confidence wavered. Galvor was claiming that Nari had been stolen from him, not sold, and that her presence on the market at Talon 5 had been unauthorized. It was a flimsy claim, but one that could potentially tie them up in legal proceedings for months or even years. What do we do? Nari asked, fear evident in her voice. Jalen considered their options. They could run, disappear into the uncharted regions of space where legal jurisdiction was murky at best. But that would mean a life of constant movement, always looking over their shoulders. And it would mean Nari would forever be labeled a fugitive, her chances of ever being recognized as a free person with rights drastically diminished. We fight, Jalen decided. Legally. We go to the interplanetary court and challenge his claim. And we don't just fight for you to stay with me. We fight for your recognition as a person, not property. Nari's eyes widened. Can we do that? It won't be easy, Jalen admitted. The laws about sentient trafficking are complicated, but there are precedents, cases where individuals have been granted personhood and freedom. For the next several weeks, as they awaited their court date, Jalen immersed himself in legal research. He consulted with advocacy groups who specialized in sentient rights, gathering evidence and building their case. Nari threw herself into the work as well, her technical skills proving invaluable as they combed through databases and archives. Together, they uncovered records showing that Galvor himself had officially surrendered Nari to the market on Talon 5, contradicting his claim that she had been stolen. They also found documentation of the abuse she had suffered under his ownership, medical records detailing injuries that could not be explained by accidents. The night before their scheduled court appearance, Nari was uncharacteristically quiet as she sat in the galley, fiddling with her name badge. Are you okay? Jalen asked gently. Nari looked up, her expression solemn. What if we lose? What if they make me go back to him? Jalen sat beside her. I won't let that happen, he promised. But Nari, I want you to know something important. No matter what any court says, you are a person. You have rights and dignity that no one can take away, even if they don't recognize them. Nari nodded slowly. I know that now, but I didn't before I met you. Jalen's heart swelled with pride for this resilient child who had endured so much, yet still maintained her capacity for trust and growth. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, we face it together. The interplanetary court was housed in a massive structure that floated in neutral space, its architecture a blend of styles from dozens of worlds, symbolizing its commitment to universal justice. As Jalen and Nari approached in the horizon, the scale of the building became apparent, a statement of power and authority that was intimidating by design. Inside, the corridors were filled with beings from across the galaxy, plaintiffs and defendants, advocates and witnesses, judges and clerks from hundreds of different species. Nari stayed close to Jalen, her hand occasionally reaching for his when the crowds became too dense. Their case was assigned to Courtroom 47, a moderate-sized chamber with seating for approximately 100 observers. As they entered, Jalen immediately spotted Galvor on the opposite side of the room, a large, reptilian being with iridescent scales and cold, calculating eyes. Beside him stood a team of legal representatives, their sleek attire and confident postures suggesting expensive expertise. In contrast, Jalen and Nari had only one advocate, a Terran woman named Lyra who specialized in sentient rights cases and had agreed to represent them pro bono. "Don't be intimidated," Lyra advised in a low voice as they took their seats. "Numbers don't win cases. Truth does." When the judge entered, a being of indeterminate gender with crystalline features that caught and refracted the light, everyone in the courtroom rose. With a gesture, the judge signaled for them to be seated and proceeded to outline the case. "We are here today to address the ownership dispute regarding the sentient being designated NS-7291, also known as Nari Serah," the judge stated, their voice resonating with a musical quality. "Galvor of Draconics claims rightful ownership and seeks immediate return of the subject. Jalen of Earth contests this claim, and furthermore, petitions for recognition of Nari Serah as a free person under interplanetary law, Section 42.3.7. The proceedings began with Galvor's representatives presenting their case. They argued that Nari had been illegally removed from Galvor's possession, that her sale on Talon 5 had been unauthorized, and that as her rightful owner, Galvor was entitled to her return. Furthermore, the lead representative concluded, "The subject has demonstrated significant monetary value through her technical abilities, which are the product of training provided by our client. To deny him the fruits of his investment would be an unjust taking of property." Throughout their presentation, Nari sat rigidly beside Jalen, her face a mask of control, though her hands trembled slightly where they rested in her lap. When it was their turn, Lyra rose gracefully. "Your Honor, we contest not only Galvor's specific claim to Nari Serah, but the entire premise upon which it is based. We will demonstrate that Nari Serah is a person, not property, and thus cannot be owned by anyone." She proceeded to present the evidence they had gathered. The records showing Galvor had voluntarily surrendered Nari to the market, the documentation of abuse, and the legal precedents supporting personhood for sentient beings. "But perhaps the most compelling evidence," Lyra continued, "is Nari Serah herself. With the court's permission, we request that she be allowed to speak on her own behalf." The judge considered this for a moment, then nodded. "The court will hear from Nari Serah." Nari looked at Jalen, fear and determination battling in her expression. He gave her an encouraging nod. With a deep breath, she rose and approached the designated speaking area. She looked tiny there, standing alone before the imposing bench, but she stood straight, her badge gleaming on her chest. "My name is Nari Serah," she began, her voice soft but clear. "For a long time, I didn't know that. I was called defect, or property, or simply you. I was told I had no value except for what I could do for others. I was punished when I failed to meet expectations and discarded when I became inconvenient." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I understand that in your legal system, some beings are classified as property. But property doesn't feel pain. Property doesn't hope or dream or remember. property doesn't wake up screaming from nightmares about what was done to it." The courtroom was utterly silent. Every being present focused intently on the small blue figure standing before them. "I am not property," Nari continued, her voice growing stronger. "I think, I feel, I create. I fix things that are broken. I learn and grow. I remember my homeworld with its 2 suns and silver forests, even though I was taken from it so young." She touched the badge on her chest. "This has my name on it. Not a designation, not a number, but my name, because I am someone, not something." Nari's gaze swept across the courtroom, briefly meeting Galvor's cold stare without flinching. "I don't want to belong to anyone," she said firmly. "Not even to Jalen, who saved me and has shown me nothing but kindness. I want to be free to choose my own path. I want the chance to find my family, if they still live. I want the right to say no when someone would use me in ways that cause harm." She took a deep breath. "Your laws may classify me as property, but your laws have been wrong before. They have been changed before. I ask you to see me, really see me, and recognize that I am a person." With that, Nari returned to her seat beside Jalen, who looked at her with undisguised pride. The judge was silent for a long moment, their crystalline features unreadable. Finally, they spoke. "This court will recess to consider the arguments presented. We will reconvene in 2 hours." The waiting was excruciating. Jalen, Nari, and Lyra found a quiet corner in one of the court's atrium spaces, trying to prepare for either outcome. "You were incredible," Jalen told Nari. "No matter what happens, never forget what you said in there. It was truth, and truth matters, even when it isn't recognized." Nari nodded, clutching her badge. "I wasn't sure I could speak," she admitted. "But then I remembered all the times I wanted to speak and couldn't, because of the silence collar, or because I was afraid. I didn't want to be silent anymore." When they returned to the courtroom, it was even more crowded than before. Word had spread about the unusual case and the extraordinary testimony of the young alien girl. The judge entered and called for silence. "This case presents complex questions of law, ethics, and personhood," they began. "The traditional legal framework would suggest a straightforward resolution in favor of documented ownership rights. However, the testimony presented today compels this court to look beyond traditional frameworks." The judge's crystalline features caught the light as they turned toward Nari. "Nari Sarah has demonstrated not only sentience, but a profound understanding of her own existence and a clear desire for self-determination. These qualities lie at the heart of what we recognize as personhood across all sentient species." Galvor shifted angrily in his seat, his scales flashing with agitation. "Therefore," the judge continued, "this court rules as follows. First, Galvor's claim of ownership is rejected based on the documented evidence that he voluntarily surrendered all rights when he returned Nari Serra to the market on Talon 5. A murmur ran through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's raised hand. Second, and more significantly, this court recognizes Nari Serra as a person under interplanetary law, Section 42.3.7, which provides for the recognition of personhood for sentient beings who demonstrate self-awareness, rational thought, and the desire for self-determination. Nari's eyes widened, her hand finding Jalen's and squeezing tightly. As such, the judge concluded, Nari Serra is hereby declared a free person, with all the rights and protections afforded to persons under interplanetary law. She is not property and cannot be owned by any individual or entity. The courtroom erupted in sound. Cheers from some, protests from others. Galvor rose from his seat, his face contorted with rage. But his representatives quickly pulled him back down, speaking urgently into his ear. Jalen turned to Nari, who sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. "You're free," he said softly. "Truly free." Nari looked up at him, her eyes shining. "We won," she whispered. "I'm a person. They said I'm a person." "You always were," Jalen replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "Now everyone else knows it too." As they left the courtroom, navigating through crowds of beings offering congratulations and reporters seeking statements, Nari walked with her head held high, her badge gleaming under the lights. "What happens now?" she asked, as they finally reached the relative quiet of the docking bay, where the horizon waited. Jalen considered the question. "That's entirely up to you. Nari, you're free to choose your own path. If you want to try to find your family, we can start searching. If you want to stay with me on the horizon, you're welcome for as long as you wish. If you want something else entirely, education, a different career, a life on a planet instead of a ship, we'll figure out how to make that happen." Nari was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "I want to stay with you," she finally said. "At least for now. But I also want to help others like me, children who have been bought and sold, who don't know they're people and not things." Jalen smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea, and I'd be honored to help you with that mission." In the months that followed their victory in court, Jalen and Nari transformed the horizon and their lives. Using the skills Nari had developed and Jalen's connections throughout the galaxy, they began a new kind of trade, one focused on liberation rather than profit. They upgraded the ship, expanding its capacity and retrofitting a workshop where Nari could develop specialized tools for their work. She designed devices that could detect and deactivate restraint collars, created portable medical scanners calibrated for dozens of species, and built communication aids for those who had been silenced for too long. Word spread quietly among advocacy networks about the human trader and the blue alien girl who could help those who had been labeled as property. Sometimes, their missions were straightforward, using legal channels to purchase freedom for those being sold, then helping them connect with support networks. Other times, their work required more subterfuge, slipping into markets like the one on Talon 5 to gather evidence of abuse or to make contact with those being trafficked. Each child, each person they helped find freedom received a metal badge with their true name etched upon it. It became a symbol recognized throughout certain corners of the galaxy, a mark of personhood reclaimed. Nari grew not just in confidence, but in her technical expertise. By the time she was the equivalent of 14 in human years, she had developed a reputation as one of the most skilled mechanics in 3 systems. Ship captains would seek out the horizon specifically to have her work on their vessels, paying her directly for her services. A novel experience for someone who had once been considered merely an extension of her owner's property. Jalen watched her growth with pride, adapting his role from protector to mentor to partner as her capabilities and independence increased. They were truly family now, bonded by choice rather than blood, their shared mission strengthening the connection between them. One evening, as they prepared to leave a spaceport where they had just helped resettle 3 children rescued from a mining operation, Nari approached Jalen with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the horizon." "What about it?" Jalen asked, looking up from the navigation calculations he was reviewing. "It's a good ship," Nari continued, "but it's getting old, and we need more space, especially if we're going to keep expanding our work." Jalen nodded thoughtfully. The horizon had served them well, but its limitations were becoming more apparent with each mission. "What did you have in mind?" Nari's eyes lit up as she produced a datapad and showed him the designs she had been working on. Specifications for a new ship, larger and more efficient, with dedicated spaces for medical treatment, secure quarters for rescued individuals, and an expanded workshop. "I've been saving the credits I've earned from repair work," she explained. "It's not enough for the whole ship, but it's a start." Jalen studied the designs, impressed by the thoughtfulness and technical sophistication of her planning. "This is exceptional work, Nari," But a ship like this would cost— I know, she interrupted, her expression determined. But I also know we could do so much more with the right vessel. We could help more people, reach places we can't access now. She hesitated, then added, I want to call it the Everlight. Everlight, Jalen repeated, testing the name. I like it. Why that name? Nari's hand went to the badge on her chest, a gesture that had become second nature to her over the years. Because that's what freedom is, a light that should never go out. And because when I was in that cage on Talon 5, I thought all the light in my life was gone forever. But it wasn't. It was just waiting to be found again. Jalen felt a lump form in his throat. Everlight it is. Then, and as for the credits, I may have been saving as well. Between the two of us, we might be closer to this new ship than you think. The joy that spread across Nari's face was a far cry from the resigned emptiness he had first seen in the market on Talon 5. She had bloomed like a flower, finding sunlight after too long in shadow. 6 months later, they stood together in the docking bay of a major shipyard, watching as the final preparations were made on the Everlight. It was everything Nari had designed and more, sleek and efficient, with state-of-the-art systems and ample space for their expanding mission. She's beautiful, Nari breathed, taking in the sight of the ship that would become their new home. She is, Jalen agreed, and so is the work we'll do with her. As they boarded the Everlight for the first time as its owners, Jalen couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a chance encounter in a disreputable market, to a partnership that had already changed dozens of lives for the better. Nari moved through the ship with confidence, her fingers trailing over the control panels and bulkheads as though greeting an old friend. When she reached the main cabin, she turned to Jalen with shining eyes. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. Jalen shook his head. No, Nari, thank you. You reminded me what it means to truly see someone, not for what they can do or what they're worth, but for who they are. Together, they initiated the Everlight systems, watching as the ship came to life around them. As the engines hummed with ready power, Nari took her place at the navigation console, her badge catching the light. Where to first? Jalen asked, settling into the captain's chair beside her. Nari's fingers danced across the controls, plotting a course. I've received word about a facility in the Proxima system, she said, her expression serious but determined. They're using children to harvest crystalline formations in the asteroid belt. Dangerous work. The mortality rate is high. Jalen nodded, his jaw set. Proxima it is. As the Everlight lifted off, its departure from the shipyard marked not just the beginning of a journey through space, but the continuation of a mission that had become their shared purpose: to bring light to the darkest corners of the galaxy, to transform defective merchandise into recognized persons, to create homes where before there had only been ownership. For Nari Sarah, once labeled and returned too many times to count, it was the ultimate victory, not just finding a home for herself, but becoming a beacon that would guide others to freedom. And for Jalen, what had begun as an impulsive act of compassion had become the most meaningful work of his life. The stars spread out before them as the Everlight accelerated, carrying its crew toward those who still waited in cages and darkness, not yet knowing that they too deserved names of their own.